Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and kindle in us the fire of your love. This is one of those mornings where I'm getting cross-wire signals, and I'm like, yeah, I got to switch. I had a sermon that I was doing, but this one's going to be a little different. As I read that, Lazarus come out, and the dead man came out. I mean, can you imagine? The dead guy comes out of his grave. How does this happen? This is not what we are familiar with. We weep at graves. We remember the saints who have gone before us. When someone is dead, they are dead. And we hope to see them in that communion of all saints later. But Jesus wasn't waiting for that. You know, Marion was like, well, I know we'll see, at the last day. But Jesus is like, if you believe now, you will see this glory. And so Jesus did this incredible thing that we still talk about 2,000 years later, bringing Lazarus back from the dead. And of course, I always think of that when I'm praying for people. I had the opportunity to go and bring communion and anoint Don Domino, who was one of Phil Bedeau's best friends from high school. And his heart is failing. He's in congestive heart failure. They just sent him home and said, you're on hospice now. There's nothing else we can do for you. But they probably thought there was nothing else that could be done for Lazarus either. And he's really not ready to die just yet. And so I prayed for healing. We did a provisional last rites, because he wanted his bases covered. But I said, they don't call it last rites so much anymore. When we anoint people that are very sick, they call it extreme unction. But they quit calling it always last rites because they found that after people got anointed, they lived. They got better. So there's some power in this sacrament that I'm too stupid to be able to explain. But I've seen miracles. I've seen people who were supposed to die not die. Not often, and none of us gets out of here alive. But I remember when I was a chaplain, and I'm sure I've told this story before, there was a woman, Sarah, who was very sick, who was in a coma and septic and in ICU most of the summer that I was there doing my chaplaincy. And her family hung out. But he was. If you've read the book, if you've seen the movie, God still does big miracles. Not often that we get to see something that big. But whenever I'm praying for someone, I always think of this gospel story. Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. So how hard can healing be? If Jesus could raise Lazarus from the dead, let's not be afraid to pray big prayers. So as I met with Don and his beloved Debbie yesterday, I just said, he says, they've written me off a long time ago, but I'm still ready to fight. And I said, well, I will pray for your healing, but if you want to do the last 3 rites thing, we can kind of do it provisionally and just say, when it's your time, which is what we did. And I don't know what's going to happen. I'm going to keep praying for a big miracle. Why not? I can remember when Phil got diagnosed with cancer, he said he was going to last 5 years, and he just about made it. And it was esophageal cancer, and that's a tough one. But Don Watson is an esophageal cancer survivor. A diagnosis isn't the end of the story. The end of our story happens when God calls us home, and not before. And sometimes our story continues, like in an extreme case like Lazarus or Sarah. And, months after I was done with my chaplaincy, I got a call from this woman who said, well, I don't know if you'll remember me. She said, but my name's Sarah. And I knew immediately who it was. And she says, well, I don't really remember you, but my family does. They said you hung out with them all summer. And she was home and doing well and just completely healed. We have a big God. And that's not how it always happens. We've buried enough people around here to know. And sometimes we don't even get a chance to pray for people because they go so quick. I think of Jean. She just had a heart attack, called 911, and she was gone. And I had a friend who lost her sister that way, and she's like, if it was cancer, we could have begged God, to heal her. He didn't even give us time to ask. And sometimes when we lose somebody so quickly, we don't, and then we have that feeling like, if I'd have known. But you know what? We're not in charge. God is the author of life and death. Well, God's not the author of death, but he's the one that says when it happens. And as I've said before, we all can't live forever on this planet. It couldn't possibly sustain us. But in God's kingdom, we will. And that's what we celebrate this day. We celebrate all the saints. We celebrate all those lights and beyond that we remember, that are still living in God's kingdom. That's what we celebrate. And there are the champions of the saints, the big S saints. And I'll bet most of those candles are not for the big S saints. Mine wasn't. It was for my grandmother and my grandfather and my godmothers and my godfather and a teacher who was a Christian that took me under her wing. She was the PE teacher at the school, and when I was student teaching, and she just would take me out to lunch every week and would never let me pay. She's like, you're a college student. You can treat somebody else to lunch on another day. Pay it forward. But she had such faith. And we had such great conversations, and it was just this gift from God. And we have those people in our life right now, the living saints that we are privileged to do life with. That piece of the Hebrews reading too, or not Hebrews, Revelation. It says, see, the home of God is among mortals. He will dwell with them, they will be his people, and God himself will be with them. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more, for the first things have passed away. So God does this new thing, and he brings us into the community of heaven with him and with the saints who have gone before us, and it's such a beautiful thing. And, in Hebrews, and this is part of what I talked about earlier, when I was ordained back in 2009, I can't believe that already. During the litany of prayers, they have us lay on the floor, the ordinands. And as I'm laying on this floor in the cathedral where I was baptized, I was remembering that my parents had brought me there with my godparents, and one of them was a priest and the dean of the cathedral, and it was done on a Saturday, I think, because the guy baptizing me and my parents, they had their own churches they had to be at. So I was baptized at the cathedral, and as I laid there that day while they're doing this litany of prayer, they started naming the saints. And all my saints started flashing through my head, who were no longer with me. My grandma, Sally, this PE teacher, my friend Sue Bungard, who I'd hoped would live long enough to see me ordained. And in the end, I thought, she was too sick. She wouldn't have been able to come to my ordination anyway. And so God saw that she got there in another way, by being a part of that great cloud of witnesses. In Hebrews 12, it says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. We are the people that God needs in the world today. There were these champions, these saints who led extraordinary lives. But so much of the kingdom work is done by the likes of folks like me and you. And the big saints that we remember were probably one day pretty ordinary people that God called to do some extraordinary things. And they had enough faith to do it. And there's a poem my dad read at my mom's funeral. Or a reading, not exactly a poem. And I don't know who wrote it. But it says, why were the saints saints? Because they were cheerful when it was difficult to be cheerful, patient when it was difficult to be patient, and because they pushed on when they wanted to stand still, and kept silent when they wanted to talk, and were agreeable when they wanted to be disagreeable. That was all. It was quite simple, and always will be. It really doesn't take a whole lot to be a saint. We're called to be the people of God, to love others, to love God, to serve him, to serve others. And that's That's what those lights represent, the people in our lives that did that for us. And I was blessed this week. My friend Elizabeth, I talk about the priest in Iowa, her husband invited her. She's on sabbatical right now. And her husband was doing a business trip to Naperville and said, "Do you want to come with?" And so I got this text, "Want to meet me for lunch?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And so on All Saints, I got to hang out with one of my favorite saints on this side of the world. And just the blessing that we can be to other people. You know, we are called to be lights in this dark world. And I saw a thing on Facebook this week which made me pause because the climate and the rhetoric is just so hateful. And it's discouraging. And I tried to find the source of this, and what I found was that a lady, Lainey Love Dalby, shared this on her page, and she said, "This is copied and pasted from my friend Gail Larson on Facebook, who got it from another friend." So somewhere this thing came, but it was so good. And it says, "While much of America seems to be getting more and more divisive, I'm going to be holding doors for strangers, letting people cut in front of me in traffic, greeting all I meet, exercising patience with others, and smiling at strangers. I'll do this as often as I have opportunity. I will not stand idly by and let children live in a world where unconditional love is invisible and being rude is acceptable. Join me in showing love and respect to others." That's what we can do. We are the saints that this world needs today. Like my dad's little reading was, it's quite simple, and it always will be. We have the ability to share the light of God's love with anyone we meet. It's not hard. It doesn't cost. Well, sometimes it's hard. But it doesn't cost us a thing. Grace is free. Love is abundant. We are loved, and we love because He first loved us. May we all leave this place just committed to remember the love that those saints, that those candles represent, poured into our lives. And make a commitment to do what we can to pour that love into the lives of those around us. Maybe even some strangers we encounter. This world is so broken. But God isn't finished. We are the saints this world needs today. Amen.